Castillo cut off her hands.
Randall talked about what he did with her hands.
I'd forgotten to put them in with the body. I had nowhere else to put them, so I wrapped them in plastic and put them in a crock pot.
And buried an axe in her head.
And as soon as he raised it, I already knew what it was going to do, and I turned my head and I heard it hit. And it's a sound I won't never forget.
Because he did not think that she showed him appropriate respect.
He was telling her that she needed to shut up and just be still for a while, otherwise she wouldn't like the results.
A quick disclaimer before I start the video. A lot of the images and screen recordings that you'll see me using come from the KSAT 12 News channel on YouTube, who did a great job at gathering the visuals, as it was hard for me to find footage of the trial myself. Nicole Niki Perry, a San Antonio, Texas native and mom of 3 daughters, whose ages were 15, 11, and 10 back in 2020, wasn't really able to be as present for them as they needed her to be. You see, Niki had been battling with her drug addiction for years, hindering her abilities to parent her daughters adequately. Nonetheless, she loved her daughters dearly and they loved their mother just the same. Another love in Niki's life was her fiance, Randall Fulgham, whom she had been with for 8 years. He too was an avid drug user, specifically crystal meth, and they both used together. I'm assuming their drug habit hindered their financial stability because in November of 2020, Niki and Randall were unfortunately evicted from their home. Randall had a friend named Gizmo who had his own house, and he asked Gizmo if he and Niki can come over there and stay until they get up on their feet, and Gizmo agreed. Now, this home was no ordinary home. This home was a known trap house located at 338 West Harlan Avenue in the south side of San Antonio. The home was very much recognized as the party drug spot on that block. The house was known for its drug activity and was hot on police radar, even getting busted several times in the past. In the back of this home was a garage that was transformed into a living space in which Gizmo's cousin, a man named Rafael Castillo, and Gizmo's girlfriend was already residing. With Niki and Randall moving into the space, it would make it an occupancy of 5 people. However, many more people frequented the space, going in and out of the home, mainly those who were on drugs and needed a place to do their drugs or a place to sleep or eat, etc. Now, with more than several people living in this space, battling addiction, where drugs were their one and only priority, you can imagine the conditions there were chaotic. The whole space in the garage where Niki and Randall was going to be staying was filled with trash. It was junky, and there was plenty of traffic going in and out of that house constantly in both the main home and the garage. Now, fast forward to the middle of November, and those close to Niki had noticed she'd been gone missing for a while, almost a few weeks actually. And although Niki was battling a drug addiction, she wasn't one to go missing for so long to where no one knew where she was. And on one Thursday afternoon, November 19th, 2020, a public works employee named Oscar Flores and his co-worker were working outside, and they were asked to pick up trash in a known dump site that was off South WW White Road in southeast Bexar County, where people illegally would dump their trash. There were several trash bags near each other, and some of them were fairly heavy, as trash normally would be. However, there were 2 trash bags specifically that was extra heavy and hard to lift, but one of the bags ripped open. And that is when Oscar saw what he described to be human hair laying on the back of a human's neck and a necklace. Immediately realizing the trash bag contained human parts, he called his supervisor, who then contacted the Bexar County Sheriff's Office.
And I noticed hair, long, thin hair, which is usually I would think it was a dead animal, but the hair looked too human to be an animal.
Investigators went through the trash bags and found bloodied cloth and a pair of shoes. They also discovered blue storage bins, and in one of the bins was the body of 31-year-old Nicole Niki Perry. Along with her remains was found a pink camouflage 9mm gun and the receipt for the weapon. The weapon had been reported stolen by its owner. Now, remember I told you there were several trash bags surrounding the bag that had Niki's remains in it. Well, that trash had plenty of viable evidence in there, allowing investigators to find out where Niki was residing. According to Bexar County Sheriff Javier Salazar, they were able to question 9 people who frequented the home, and when all 9 people were questioned, they all had the same story. That 26-year-old Rafael Castillo was the one responsible for killing Niki. The witnesses revealed Rafael to be the prime suspect for the case, plus the evidence found on Niki corroborated what the witnesses said. However, Rafael was nowhere to be found, and the search for him went on for a few weeks. And in the following month of December in 2020, Rafael Castillo was located and arrested in Brownsville, Texas, where he was hiding out, staying with family. He was detained by the Lone Star Fugitive Task Force, then transferred to Bexar County.
Come on, Rafa.
Sir, what are you being arrested for today? Is there anything you'd like to tell the cameras?
Do you have any regrets about ending up here?
Do you have anything to say to Nicole Perry's family?
Can you tell us anything about why she was killed?
Any remorse?
Were you 2 friends?
Anything you want to say to your family?
This is your chance to say anything.
And escorted into the Bexar County Adult Detention Facility on Wednesday, December 16th, 2020 at 200 North Comal Street.
New at 6, 2 recent murder cases, one involving a dismembered body, the other a lover's triangle, now back in the forefront. Paul Venema learned that the grand jury has returned murder indictments in each case.
26-year-old Rafael Castillo was returned to San Antonio last December, capping a month-long investigation. He was arrested in Brownsville, wanted for the murder of 31-year-old Nicole Perry. Her body was found by highway work crews in a brushy area on the southeast side about a month earlier. An investigation by sheriff's deputies led to this house in the 300 block of Harlan Street, the sheriff told us.
Miss Perry was actually killed with an axe or a hatchet there at the scene.
He said witnesses said that Perry and Castillo had gotten into an argument. Castillo claimed that she had disrespected his name and he was going to teach her a lesson.
It appears at this point from the information that we developed that she was actually partially dismembered while still alive. Her hands were cut off.
The woman's murder remains an ongoing investigation.
Rafael was charged with first-degree murder and a bond was set for $500,000, in which Rafael did bond out and was placed on strict house arrest, in which surprisingly he abided by. Now, there were 2 specific witnesses that were present for Niki's murder who can attest to what happened to her from start to finish because they was right there in the room when it happened. One of the key witnesses was Niki's own fiance, Randall. Shortly after Niki's death, Randall was actually arrested due to a violation of his sex offender registry. The other witness was a woman named Vanessa Vargas, who was the girlfriend of Gizmo that I told you about earlier, who also had been detained for violating her probation. Both Randall and Vanessa told investigators and a courtroom during trial held the way Rafael had murdered Niki. They explained that Rafael had severed Niki's hands, chopping them off with a machete while she was still alive, up and alert. After chopping her hands off, he then struck her in the head with an axe, leaving the axe stuck in her skull. She also had been brutally beaten. After chopping her hands off, Raphael turned to Randall and Vanessa and made them clean up the bloody mess afterwards and threatened that they'd be next if they had any complaints or if they even thought about telling on him.
Castile, who is currently out on bond, is on trial for allegedly cutting Perry's hands off while she was alive and then striking her with an axe over the head, killing her. Lotus's testimony, as well as photos and evidence from the site Perry was found, were presented to the jury. Barrett County Sheriff's Deputy Jason Tibbs collected evidence that was found inside another trash bag near Perry's body. Inside, several items with blood on it, including duct tape and a pair of shoes.
Was there something written on the inside sole?
Yes, there is.
What's written there?
Niki.
Okay. And what appears to be on both pairs of shoes?
Yeah, appears to have alleged blood.
As for the defense, it seems that they're going to try to show if the witnesses in this case are credible or not, as they all lived in the same drug house as the victim and the defendant. If he is found guilty, Rafael Castile is facing up to life in prison.
A trial for the murder of Niki was actually held just last year in 2022, and it went on for about a week. What's crazy is the entire time between his arrest in 2020 and the trial in 2022 is when Raphael was home on house arrest. The people of the public did want to see Raphael on trial facing a death penalty sentence. However, that sentence wouldn't come to fruition because Raphael was charged only with first-degree murder. Apparently, he was only charged with first-degree murder because there wasn't an additional crime committed within the act of Niki's murder. Capital murder would have involved either additional murders of more people or aggravated robbery or other crimes that would have needed to be committed. A judge in the case made a statement that no matter how horrific the details of this murder was, the law cannot be changed. So why did this gruesome act of violence even happen to begin with? Well, apparently, Raphael's ego played center stage and allowed Raphael to feel like what he did was necessary, simply because he felt like Niki didn't show him enough respect because she wouldn't stop talking. According to Niki's fiance, Randall, Niki was a big shit talker, for a lack of better words. She was not the type of woman who backed down from confrontation from anyone. However, at this time, she was particularly staticky because she had recently been going through a lot and took a lot of losses at once. As I mentioned earlier, her and Randall had just lost their apartment, had just lost their home, and in addition to that, Niki had just lost her grandfather, her father, and her ex-husband in a horrific car accident, according to a GoFundMe that was created by a woman named Casey Maldonado, in which $930 was raised towards Niki's funeral costs, as well as financial help for Niki's daughters and mother, who had fell and broke her pelvis in 2 places shortly after Niki's death. So on this specific day, already under a lot of stress, Niki lost her cool during a verbal sparring with Raphael, in which he repeatedly asked her to shut up. He told her if she didn't stop talking, she wouldn't like what was going to happen to her next. But Niki didn't stop talking. Randall said he tried to get Niki to stop arguing, but she wouldn't stop. She just kept going. And that is when Raphael grabbed some tape and started taping her hands together. Randall said he assumed it was just a scare tactic. And at this point is when Vanessa walks in after making dinner for those who were in the house at the time, beans and biscuits specifically, and she sees Niki sitting with her hands tied. Randall said that's when Raphael grabbed the machete, walked over to Niki, looked down at her, and began saying something to her. At this point, Randall said he just froze. He couldn't recall what exactly Raphael was saying because he was so fixated on Niki and thinking to himself maybe Raphael was going to put the machete back where he got it from, still holding on to hope that this was all just a way to frighten Niki. But once Raphael raised the machete over his head, Randall realized this was definitely going to happen. He said he turned his head and he could hear the sound of the machete slamming down onto Niki's hands, amputating them completely, dismembering her while she was still alive, inflicting the most excruciating pain one can imagine. Randall said that's when Niki dropped to the floor and started squirming around, trying to look around the room, to which Randall said he assumed she may have been looking for him specifically. He said Raphael then went and picked up a black axe, swung it, and hacked into Niki's skull with the axe. Raphael said he wanted to, quote, make an example out of her.
He warned her about the stuff that she was saying.
Was she being frustrating?
Yes.
Was she being rude?
Yes.
Okay. Was she being violent?
No. He was telling her that she needed to shut up and just be still for a while. Otherwise, she wouldn't like the result. I kept trying to get her. She kept on talking. Even afterwards, she wouldn't stop. And I continued to try to get her to quit because it looks like he's pretty much upset now. He grabbed some tape and started taping her hands up. I was frozen. At first, I thought it was a scare tactic. He gets a machete and he goes over to Niki and he's looking down at her and he's speaking, but I couldn't tell what he was saying because I really wasn't paying attention to him talking. I was just watching Niki. And at any point, at some point, I'm thinking to myself, all right, he's going to pick it up after. Put the machete back down after he picked it up. And he raised it, and as soon as he raised it, I already knew what it was going to do, and I turned my head and I heard it hit. And it's a sound I won't never forget. She was on the couch at first, but then she ended up on the floor. She wasn't saying a word, but she was on her side. And she kept moving around, lifting her head up. She kept trying to look around. The only thing I could think of is she was trying to look for me. He went and grabbed a black axe. He swung it and buried it in her skull.
And what did the defendant do?
Carried on as if it never happened.
The owner of the house said he was present for when Niki and Raphael were arguing, but he had left at some point, and when he returned, he saw the axe sticking out of Niki's head. After killing Niki in cold blood, Randall said Raphael just went on with the rest of his day as if nothing ever happened, ordering Randall and Vanessa to clean up his mess and dispose of Niki's body, to which they did out of fear of being his next victims. Randall said that during the disposal of Niki, he actually had to remove the axe out of her head. Her eyes were still open, so he closed her eyes for her and told her goodbye one last time. They put her body into a blue storage bin, and Randall had forgotten to include her severed hands into the bin, so he instead placed her hands into a crock pot as a last-minute effort to hide them, and then he put the crock pot on top of a bookshelf.
I'd forgotten to put them in with the body, and so I had nowhere else to put them. So I wrapped them in plastic and put them in a crock pot that was on top of that bookshelf.
I don't know where her hands were placed after that, but Niki's hands to this day still has never been discovered. To this day, Vanessa's boyfriend Gizmo calls his friend by the name of Stephen Cleveland over to the house because Stephen had a vehicle. Stephen had no idea why he was asked to come to the house. He just knew his friend Gizmo was in need of help tossing out some trash, so he showed up. And we noticed to be the details because Stephen himself said this during trial, to which he showed up in an orange jumpsuit as well because he was detained at the time. Now, Stephen also told the court that he went to WW White Road because everyone knows they can dump trash over there illegally, but when he made his way back to the house is when Randall handed him the crock pot with Niki's severed hands in them, telling him, quote, "You forgot this," end quote. That's when Stephen had realized what he just did. He just realized at that moment that he had discarded a human body. Stephen said once he came to the realization of what he did, did, he fled from the scene. When he left the scene, he went to his sister's house and called his attorney because he was on probation and told his attorney all the details of what happened. And the next morning, he and his attorney called authorities to tell them everything. Now, if you are like the majority and wondering why Randall didn't try to save Niki or help her somehow, well, as you can see in the video, Randall is a very physically weak, withering man deteriorating from drugs, and quite frankly was probably high as hell just before all this happened, standing at about 5'8", maybe 110 pounds soaking wet. Raphael stands at about 6'4", almost 300 pounds with machetes, guns, and axes in hand. I can imagine that Randall felt defeated, especially since Raphael threatened to kill him and Vanessa if they didn't help him, and if they told on him. Randall said ever since Niki's murder, he's been having trouble sleeping at night. And what's crazy is initially Randall lied to police about what happened. Initially, he said he didn't know what happened, obviously trying to protect himself in fear of the threats that he received from Raphael, but he eventually went and told everything because at that point he felt like he had nothing to lose and nothing to live for. He watched his love get severed alive right in front of his face. An autopsy revealed that the gash from the axe in Niki's head was 4 inches deep. Vanessa, also an addict, took the stand at trial and said she didn't try to help investigators initially either because Raphael didn't only threaten her, but he threatened the life of her son. She said Raphael told her he'd shoot her and her son to death if she didn't help and if she told. She told the court Raphael was jumping up and down and seemed to be really happy when he started to kill Niki. She said, quote, she was on the floor in a fetal position. He ended up putting an axe in her skull. I saw it all. I was beyond scared. I had never seen nothing like that in my life. I was in a room with 3 men I didn't know. I would have done anything that they told me to do, end quote. She said her and Randall used everything absorbent that they could to pick up the blood, and there was blood everywhere. When investigators went to raid the home on November 21st, 2020 for evidence, they didn't have to do much. Everything was right there for them. The machete was on the floor. The axe was sticking out from under the bed. They found a mop head in the trash covered in blood, paper towels covered in blood, cleaning products, and the pair of shoes that I mentioned earlier, which had Niki's name written on the side of them. As you can imagine, the cleanup duo did a shitty job and left a significant amount of evidence behind. Also, the pink gun that I mentioned earlier that was found on the scene and it had been reported stolen, well, Raphael was the one who stole that gun. Raphael was clearly arrogant and had no care in the world about what he did for him to not even try to take part in the cleanup, at least to ensure that he cleaned up his own mess. Raphael's defense team's only argument for their client is that none of the witnesses, Randall, Vanessa, nor Steven, were credible because they were all addicts and had some conflicting details in their stories. But what wasn't conflicting was their recollection of who severed Niki's hands, what was used to sever her hands, who hacked into her head with an axe, who murdered her, and the cleanup that he ordered to be done afterwards. So clearly the defense's argument went straight to hell because nobody was buying what the defense was selling. The jury only took a little over an hour to deliberate before reaching a guilty verdict. Just some brief background on Raphael for reference. A prison gang expert took the stand and revealed that there was a very likely possibility that Raphael was part of a Mexican mafia based on his tattoos, which depicted affiliation with the Texas Mexican mafia. The expert stated that based on their record of the Texas Mexican mafia, members imprisoned with these same tattoos, it was safe to assume that Raphael was indeed affiliated. And the irony in Raphael's gang drug affiliation is his family home life. You see, Raphael's sister and several other family members took the stand to speak on behalf of Raphael's character, and they were devastated, especially his sister, because the family was heavily into their Christian religion, Raphael included. He actually grew up in the church. They had no idea Raphael was living this double life. His sister was shocked. She couldn't believe her brother was capable of this, and she expressed how much she loved her brother. The family begged the court to not sentence Raphael to jail for the rest of his natural life, and the court actually took it into consideration, as Raphael was sentenced to 70 years despite the brutality of his crime. Raphael could go to the parole board in 30 years, in which he would be in his late 50s to 60s at that time. But it doesn't mean that he would be immediately granted the freedom, especially due to his mafia ties and the heinousness of the crime he committed against Niki. This story is a result of a very, very fragile ego housed by an emotionally weak man. Regardless of his obnoxious size, this jolly green giant couldn't handle a woman speaking to him in a way he didn't like. So instead of removing himself from her presence, he took her life away. This man isn't God. He has zero rights to claim her life like that over a verbal dispute. I don't think it's okay that Niki took her anger out on him and decided to verbally berate him, because no one wants to get cursed out and spoken down to. However, this man grew up a particular type of way, and instead of living through the values that his family bestowed upon him, he chose to honor a different entity, one from hell. This entire situation could have been easily avoided, but what kind of spirit do you have in order to even be able to kill someone in such a vicious, heinous manner over such a trivial conflict? What kind of hate do you harbor in your heart to be able to chop someone's body parts off and lodge an axe in their head over an argument? I don't agree with this sentence that was given to him, but for all we know, he'll fuck up again and end up staying for longer. I believe his sentence should have been that of solitary confinement for the rest of his life. This man clearly has no self-control and no remorse. The way he was able to go on about his life, the way he traveled to a different county in an attempt to avoid detainment, the way he carried on so arrogantly, to me, speaks to his disregard for human life, especially Niki's. To him, she was just another junkie who didn't deserve to see another day of light. She was disposable to him. And my heart breaks for Randall, because I could only imagine how he feels as a man sitting there high as hell, stuck. He knows he's physically no match for this man. He's terrified, he's scared, and watched the woman that he spent 8 years with, that he wanted to marry, get killed the way that she did in front of his eyes. That right there is it's just sad all around. My deepest condolences goes to Niki's daughters and anyone else who loved her dearly. Rest in peace, Nicole, Niki Perry. You'll never be forgotten.